Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam Adams-Lanham. I am the Community Engagement Librarian at the Barrington Area Library. So that means I get to work with our local nonprofits, with them and for their benefit. So this may be the most organizations that I have ever collaborated with at once, which is great fun for me and hopefully for them and for you as well. So this is actually something that we've been talking about for quite some time doing there are a number of organizations in the area that are doing ally and anti-racism work. February is Black History Month. This month and over the last few months, the library and the schools have offered programs that speak to various aspects of Black history. It is also the case that Black history is being made right now in our country, in the Chicago area, and in Barrington. There are a number of recent and ongoing efforts to raise awareness of current experiences of people of color, race, racism, and racial justice. So we're bringing together tonight some of the people who are most familiar with that, with the local efforts, and hoping that they can share with you some of what they know. You will notice that I used the word some a lot in that previous sentence. Many of the people who are here have spent decades of their life on this work and in this learning. And so we're very good, but I don't think that we can transfer all of our knowledge to you in 45 minutes tonight. So we just kind of want to give a little bit of a taste of some of the things that are happening and some different ways of looking at and thinking about race and racism in America. I know that I have not recruited people from every group that is doing that work. I know, for example, I think St. Anne's Catholic Church has a group that started recently. And I know the Rotary, the Barrington Breakfast Rotary, has a diversity, equity, and inclusion group that is doing a lot of work and some really interesting things. Again, this is the most organizations I've worked with for one program. So this seemed like a good place to start with. So, give me just a moment and I'm going to give you the names of the folks in the panel and what the specific local organizations are that they're working with. And then they're each gonna have a chance to talk a little bit about some of the things they know and kind of different ways of thinking about things, what we know about race and racism in Barrington now, how to talk about these things with other family members, particularly children, how the schools are working on these efforts, and then where you can go to learn more if we've piqued your curiosity. So we have with us today Jessica Sawyer Green, who is probably best known for her work with Courageous Conversations and Courageous Community. She's one of the founders and curators of that effort. Grant Elliott, who is also one of the founders of Be the Change Barrington, a coalition of Barrington High School students and alumni who are people of color. We have Nate Rouse, who is the Director of Equity, Race, and Cultural Diversity Initiatives for Barrington 220, hired over the summer. We have Kyle Kick, who is the Executive Director of BStrong Together. And we have Zina Jacque, who is also works with Courageous Conversations and has done some work with a number of other organizations, specifically locally. I know the Peace and Justice Committee, that is a joint effort between the Community Church of Barrington and St. Michael's Episcopal Church. Just to double check, I'm hearing from one person that they're having a hard time hearing. Is everybody else able to hear okay? Yes? Okay. Hopefully that clears up. So we'll move forward. So I'm going to, this will be somewhat conversational and somewhat just people giving us a little bit of background on their work. There will be an opportunity to ask some questions. However, we are going to wait until we've all had a chance, so we've had a chance to hear from everyone. So if you have questions for us, please throw them in the chat at any time. The chat will come directly to me, and then I will voice the questions to the folks who are on our panel. So with that said, Jessica, could I prevail upon you to go first?
You may. Thank you so much, Sam. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am so touched and flattered and honored to be here tonight with my esteemed colleagues in the work of anti-racism here in Barrington. It's a joy to be able to partner with everybody here. And I'm so excited about the work that we have done and are planning to do and moving forward in the community. So I'm Jess Green. I grew up in Barrington and came back to raise my kids here. When I became a mom, that's when I really started to explore anti-racism work, and I kind of fell into it. I didn't even know that's what I was doing. But when you become a parent, or at least when I became a parent, I became extremely curious about the world and the things that I needed to explain to my kids. So that really began my own personal journey. And so there was an organization that I was able to participate in seminars with called the National Seed Program. And Sam has that information. She can pop it in the chat, but it's Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity is what it stands for. And it was hosted at our kids' school. And at the time we were living in Chicago. And I joined this seminar. We met monthly, and I didn't realize really why I was there. I thought I was like, okay, we're here for diversity and inclusion, and this is awesome, and I'm a nice person, and let's do this. And what I walked out of it realizing was that I had a lot to learn. And so I dropped out of the program. About 3 months in, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what my place was in it. I kept trying to get answers right, and it wasn't about getting things right or wrong. It was about learning and listening. And so even though I dropped out, I kept thinking and questioning and having conversations with my husband and saying stupid things and having his eyebrows go like, excuse me, try that again. And so I was continuous on this process and on this journey of discovery. Once we moved to Barrington, I got to meet Zina Jacque, and a fellow BHS alumni, Claire Nelson, and I got to talking, and we thought, hey, we need to start having conversations around anti-racism and having courageous conversations in the Barrington community. What does that look like? And so I was so fortunate to be able to partner with both Zina and Claire in creating courageous conversations. It was a pilot year, our first year, 2019 to 2020. And while we were thinking about what kind of topics we wanted to touch on, I was very, very interested in starting with that kind of aha self-awareness moment that I had with Seed so many years ago, because I really felt that in order for us to even lean into the conversation around race and racism, that we really have to understand the work that we need to do internally first. So we designed the program to begin with things like understanding fear and why do we respond so strangely to people who are different than ourselves, and why do we have that fear response? We also moved into mindfulness. Understanding what it takes to respond rather than react. And trust me, a lot of this came from my own personal therapy and my own personal responses, like dropping out of an anti-racism program however many years ago. So then when we got to mindfulness, we then built onto that block by talking about bias and prejudice, and brought in Dr. Erin Reeves, who works in this field. She's local from Chicago, and she helped us to understand the neuroscience behind all of it. She helped us to understand and interrupt those biases and help us to lean into those things with curiosity and compassion for oneself and for others, trying to understand what is at the root of these biases. Like, where did that story come from? What is the narrative that I know and I have imprinted into my brain to make me think one way or another about somebody else? So we went into those places, and they were building blocks and tools, as Zina will support me in saying that these are all things that go into your toolbox to be able to even start to have a conversation around your own role in race and racism in America. So after the bias and prejudice talk, we went into generous listening, which again, you can apply to any relationship you have, especially your spouse or your parents with whom you disagree. And we learned about what it is to listen actively for understanding rather than to argue and win a conversation or a point. And so that was something that was really great, and I put into my toolbox as well. And once we got to that point, we talked about what is, or at least for me, I'm going to talk about myself as a white woman, what is my role in racism in America, structurally, personally, familially, and in friend circles, and how do I perpetuate it, and how can I stop the cycles? And so what that conversation started to become was around privilege. And we explored all different types of privilege, but particularly focused on racial privilege. And one of the books and speakers that we brought in for that conversation was Dr. Robin DiAngelo. She writes a book called White Fragility, which rubs a lot of white people the wrong way, but it was one that I felt really helped me in understanding what was going through my own body and my own thoughts when I was confronted with conversations around racism and what my role in it was. And then from there, we moved into, hold on, let me check my notes here. We moved into understanding how, in order to be able to have compassion for others, have empathy for others, lean into others' lived experiences, that we need to get proximate with others, people who are not like ourselves. And so we explored what it was to watch movies, read books by people of different races, of different cultures, of different ethnicities, of different religions, of different abilities, backgrounds, etc. And to make sure that what we were exposing ourselves to has a multitude of experiences and stories, and it's not just one stereotype that we are trying to perpetuate in our understanding of a certain people or anything. So that was an exciting opportunity to be able to reassess and look at my own bookshelves, look at the movies that I'm watching, think about the people that I'm speaking with and socializing with, and try to expand my horizons there. So we also got into the idea of being uncomfortable and what that feels like, and how we can ride that wave of discomfort and not let us walk out of the session like I did my first time in Seed 10 years ago, but to let it wash over me and allow my curiosity and introspection to help to inform me as to why I might be having certain responses or reactions, and allowing myself to lean into that with curiosity and moving into a place of, okay, well, what do I have to do to not get my feathers ruffled so easily anymore? And that included coming to terms with my own whiteness, white culture in America and what that means, where it shows up in my life, where it shows up in our culture, in our community, where it's showing up in our education systems and in society, and in my own behaviors. And it also meant getting comfortable with the understanding of white supremacy as a system in which I am a participant. And so those were all places and things that we tried to encapsulate into 10 months of a year of courageous conversations. And at the end, really, the question after you start with yourself, it's like, I'm so overwhelmed with all this new information. There's so many books that I need to read on anti-racism. Where do I start? I'm a good person. Seriously, like, please help me to understand. Where I like to kind of narrow my focus when I get overwhelmed is to start with myself and then to look into what is the sphere of influence that I have, where I can actually make a difference. And so it's a constant practice and a choice to reach towards anti-racism as a lived reality, but also then to move into talking to your children about it, which I try to do with my kids. And sometimes they bring it up and sometimes they roll their eyes at me, but we keep talking, talking with your spouses, talking with your friends, especially friend circles. I feel like that's a major place where we can be comfortable with one another. We can trust one another. We can ask stupid questions and we can explore the answers together. And then into your workspaces, into your school spaces, into your church groups. So the spheres of influence is the place where we like to think at Courageous Conversations, you can not be overwhelmed, but you can really focus yourself so that your internal work turns into action in your community. So that's a bit of my story with Courageous Conversations and what we've tried to do in our first year. We're still going. We have sessions every second Wednesday. We've had all of our panelists here have participated or spoken at some point. We've had Grant and Nate on our podcast, which Zina and I just launched this year. So that's another safe place to put your earpods, is that what they're called, in and go for a walk and listen to what we're talking about behind the scenes, because we haven't got it completely sorted either. So we're trying to figure it out too, and we invite you to come along for the ride.
Thank you so much, Jess. And I, as I'm sure you noticed, nodded along to a lot of that, especially one of my most distinct memories during that first year of Courageous Conversations was taking my dog for a long walk and listening to White Fragility on my earbuds and finding myself arguing, right? Right? Like, yeah, but that doesn't really apply to me, as she's saying. Now, a lot of you are going to be saying this doesn't apply to you. And I was like, but it doesn't, because this, right? And some of those early lessons about take a deep breath, there isn't, it, not to use too hackneyed of a cliche, but it isn't black or white, that you are a racist or you are a nice person, right? It's bias, it's built in, and a certain, human beings being able to assess situations is useful. It's when it tips over into coloring everything in your life that it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. And when it becomes a part of the whole system of how our country works. So thank you so much.
Sam, I saw a couple of things going up in chat, but all of the resources, I just want to clarify this. All of the resources that I have suggested to share with all of you tonight are really directed towards the white person who is interested in doing the introspective work that leads us to practicing anti-racism as a daily habit. So I just wanted to clarify that because there are a lot of white authors up there that I realized I was like, what? I need to diversify my suggestions up here. But also the Me and White Supremacy Workbook by Layla F. Saad is one that the library hosted us through in the fall. And it's a really great place to start when you're wanting to unlearn behaviors and unpack and understand what it means to be white in America today. So,
right, yeah. And really, yes, what she said. So, I did have someone who just messaged me in chat to ask about getting these resources emailed to them, and I will send an email to everyone who is registered with everything that I put in the chat. So you don't need to try and frantically write these things down as they go past on the screen. I will make sure that all of you have them. So, Grant, I've had a chance to hear a little bit of your story, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions to learn a little bit more. So do you want to talk first just a little bit about what Be the Change Barrington is and has done? And then,
yeah, for sure. Can you all hear me too? I had some ear pod trouble, as Jess aptly put. So glad that I'm now back, and glad that I heard Jess and elaborate on the great work that she's doing with Courageous Conversations. I think what we've done with Be the Change Barrington is really, like she said, try and get proximate with the community that we love. That's the first and foremost thing. And then the next thing after starting that is getting curious about what's still going on here, and really how can we give back and help make this best community we could possibly be, inclusive to all. We've done that through, sending out surveys, having these discussions, appearing amongst our allies, the library, Creators Conversations, the district, BStrong Together, and others, and really with the goal of making sure that we are creating an inclusive Barrington for all minorities, not just BIPOC, but those of different race, orientation, gender, creed, making sure that they feel as welcome and as accepted here as they should anywhere else in the world. And that's really what we've tried to do. And we've started by focusing on education, starting with it, Barrington 220.
I am putting another link in there, and that Linktree BTCB is Be the Change Barrington. One of the top links there is to sign up for their newsletter. If you're interested in hearing more and more about what they've learned from the folks, the students and alumni of color who responded to their survey. I will also say I love your Instagram, and I am now at the point where when I go to the search feature on Instagram and put in a B, they're like, yes, we know you want to go to the Change Barrington. So I recommend that as well, and I will throw that up there as well. So you talked about the, reaching out to folks, and what were some of the trends or some of the themes that emerged once you had amassed all of that data? What did you learn?
Yeah, well, I think just some quick context on the survey. We sent it out this past June in 2020 and got roughly 700 responses from Barrington High School alumni dating back to 1970 graduates. So pretty widespread, the vast majority in the ranges from grad year 2013 to 2020. So that's where the bulk was, but we had a wider range of responses. And really the themes were, like we mentioned before, trying to potentially verify or hopefully disprove our curiosity. I think we, as a coalition of Barrington High School alumni, came back to Barrington, for many of us, as myself, thinking, maybe there's still some, rumblings around race, that this issue has still persisted. It hasn't been addressed as fully as it should have been. And we were proven right with the survey data. Again, I can go through the data and numbers, but I don't think that does justice to general themes that really show up. One key number was, around 80%. And all of those 80% believe that race is still an issue and it's not being addressed properly by students. The second half of the theme is, all right, how is the structure of the district and the school helping with that? And unfortunately, the theme showed that, generally speaking, the district has not done enough in recent years to address this issue, both systematically and amongst the student population. The saddest number, I think, was 7.4%, and that's the amount of people who actually trusted Barrington High School staff to do something about this. That was really disheartening. But again, I'm proud to say that, having talked to Nate, worked with Nate, glad the district is making strides in this direction. But the themes don't just, dissipate over time. It takes constant work. It takes consistent courage in conversations. It takes consistent curiosity to keep those things going, because these themes can be washed away just through the day-to-day life once we're back to some sort of normal, right? But our goal is to make sure that these themes aren't just used for knowledge's sake. I mean, people ask, why does just one number matter? Well, it's one number that represents so many people that were affected. And again, this is 700 people who's taken the survey. I can name personally 20 who didn't take the survey who were affected like this. And I'm sure that could be multiplied exponentially throughout our many coalition members. So it's vital to take the numbers that we have, take the insights, and really drive it home, consistently push to create a more inclusive space for all.
Yeah, there's kind of that qualitative, quantitative tension there, right? That to know one person's story in depth is really meaningful and gives you that empathy and sympathy. But sometimes it's too easy to say, oh, it's a shame that that happened to that one person. It didn't happen to just that one person. And it didn't happen one time
Yeah.
to any of those people. It's repetitive sand in the gears that just wears you down. So you alluded to this a little bit, but how does the work you've done inform the work that we have yet to do? What does the future hold?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think, you know, just going back from my experience, I'm the son of a former countryside teacher, so knowledge has always been around the family, desire to learn, desire to teach, right? But I think I give up my mother a lot of credit where it wasn't just knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's what you do with it that really matters, right? It's great to have that big sky thinking, but if you can't dwindle it down to that specific pain point to where you're going to drive home and you're going to truly utilize what you've learned to impact someone positively, that's where it matters. And that's what we've tried to do with the data. Again, 700 is a lot of data points, more than we all expected. I think we were expecting max 200, and then I think we had 200 after day one. So now it's taking that and taking the insights and looking at that, but we use that really to drive home what comes after. And we've done that through 19 actionable recommendations that were delivered to the Board of Education. We are consistently trying to follow up on that. Each recommendation was not just survey supported, but it was externally researched by our team. So it's not just, you know, hey, this is just coming from the survey. It was the survey and external material. And along with that came an action plan to how these were implemented. Again, that was in June of 2020. We are now in February 2021, and the world has changed a lot for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different people, for a lot of different areas. So we are consistently revitalizing how we talk about those implementations, both internally in BTCB, and then how we do that to our allies, making sure that these stick, they're not just out there, right? And I think we always ask ourselves the question of, so what? Why does this data actually matter? Like, why are we doing this? Because, I mean, a lot of us have full-time jobs. I know one is a frontline nurse who gives her 1 hour that she has of spare time to us, right? Why does this matter? And it matters because it's not about us, it's about the next generation that comes forward, right? How do we build the foundation for my case, right? The next young Black man that comes through Barrington. I mean, I went through North Barrington, went through the station, went through Barrington High School. The next one that follows that path, I hope to God that their worst day is better than my worst day. And it's what we do every single day, making sure that those recommendations are actively implemented properly, making sure that we continue to talk with our allies, make sure that conversations are happening, but also making sure that we're talking to our district. We're talking with Nate, we're talking with the Board of Education, we're talking with everyone to make sure that the words that we have in those conversations don't just stay in those conversations. They're implemented actionably in everything that we do. Because again, it takes the village. It's not going to take some, or it's not going to take a few. It's going to take all of us together moving in the right direction. And, you know, as Jess aptly put it, listening to understand first and then action that. That's what we have to do. And that's what the data really says. It's screaming to be used. It's not just there to be sat with and, you know, looked at and pondered upon. Oh, that's unfortunate. You know, that's something in the past. No, it's living right now, and especially in this new normal, right? As we enter hybrid learning, right? We're going to have to address and change how we have the conversations and how we implement the recommendations that we have, and then how we think of new ones. So it's that constant iterative process that, you know, we understand that this desire for a more inclusive Barrington is not stagnant. And I think that's the most important thing that this data has said. I mean, 1970 to 2020,
right?
We were stunned by that. Yeah. And it's proven that this has persisted for quite some time. And it will continue to persist if we don't utilize the data, utilize our conversations, and really drive actionable change that sticks. That's our goal. And that's, I mean, really what all we can ask for. I know I as a Black man in Barrington, that's exactly what I want for the next generation. That's exactly what we need, not just for BIPOCs, but for every minority that calls Barrington home.
I'm sure Zina and Jess are tired of hearing me say this, but there's an author that I like a lot. Alyssa Cole writes fiction, but I heard her interviewed once. She is a Black woman, and she said, the arc of the universe only bends towards justice if we push on it, right? One of my favorite things. So Nate, I think that Grant gave you a pretty good segue there
He usually does.
about what's going on, what's happening in the district, what are the steps.
Right.
Take it away, sir.
Sure. Good evening, and thank you so much. I'm so honored and privileged to be with my esteemed colleagues, who I'm happy to say I've spent some time with, and that is part of what I want to talk a little bit about. Is as Grant talked about how it takes the village. You better believe as we think about this work and we talk about systemic transformations in District 220, it's going to take the village to make this work, and I'm so thankful that we have a head start. We have an advantage that, in my humble opinion, many school districts or many school systems or individuals that are in my position do not have, which is the strength of the community. It's already here. It's vibrant. People are willing. People are engaging, and it's so exciting to be a part of that. And so I look forward to utilizing our allies as we continue to move this work forward. That being said, just a bit about myself. This is my 25th year in education, believe it or not. I've been very fortunate to work in high-performing districts and have spent time from a substitute teacher all the way through the ranks as a principal and a district administrator. So I've been fortunate to have all different hats, and those lived experiences in those positions, I feel have really helped me balance my roles in education. And so day-to-day experiences here in District 220 for me as an equity administrator is anything, all things, and everything related to equity, race, and culturally diversity initiatives. I've spent a lot of time since August trying to get to know the context, get to know the history, get to know the people in Barrington, and understand our systems and our school systems and how we think and how we operate, to get a better understanding of where we are and most importantly, where we need to go. What's I'm fortunate about also is as it relates to where we need to go is, again, I go back to the community, I go back to individuals like Grant, I go back to folks like Change Barrington, who have this phenomenal data that speaks to the issues that we've had. And as you said, we're going back from 1970 to 2020. I bet if we dug a little further, we could go even further beyond that. But the point being is that the statistics are there. We have so much information that's at the ready for us that speaks to why the systemic change needs to happen. And so with that said, what does that systemic change look like? Well, in my mind, it looks like us really, really having lots of conversations and actions, exactly as Jess has talked about earlier. We have to find a way, I have to find a way to change mindsets of our administration, of our board, as we think about policies, as we think about procedures, and go through this experience where we create these racial lenses where we just begin to think differently. And part of that is the personal journeys that everyone needs to take to understand race and how race has showed up for them and how race has impacted them personally and professionally. I think once we do that, we're able to develop a level of empathy for one another and are able to see our humankind and our humanness within one another. That being said, once we do that, although we may have differences, we'll have context and understand where we come from and how we operate and how we think. And then we can do that in a way where we're able to begin to make systemic changes in a very different way and a very different thought process. School systems currently are doing what they're set up to do. Organizations work the way they're set up to work. And they've been very, very successful. However, when we start asking the question about who they've been successful for, that's when we begin to peel back the onion a little bit and start understanding many of the conversations and many of the thoughts and philosophies that we're talking about right now, and starting to ask questions about, again, who are these systems beneficial to? And more often than not, as the data continues to tell us, in Barrington, as Grant has already talked about, but on a national and global scale, students of color generally in spaces in schools have not been afforded the opportunities to become successful. And sometimes what also happens in communities such as ours, because we do not see the diversity often is not spoken about, diversity often isn't part of curriculum. And then as a result, our kids end up going spaces where when they are faced with diversity in global settings, they don't know how to operate. And so what we're trying to do is dismantle those sort of systems so that we can start having more equitable outcomes for all of our students. So how that looks for us is, we've started this year in creating a district equity team, which I'm glad to say many of the folks that are on the panel with me are all participants of. And the reason for that is the strategy behind the notion of it taking a village to move us forward. There is no way, in my humble opinion, that we are going to be able to move and start having these conversations and start changing policies, practices, procedures, curriculum, and pedagogy without the support of a community that understands the why behind these equitable outcomes. Even as we began the conversations, as a matter of fact, of addressing particular issues, we're already beginning to develop some of the pushback and some of the wonderings as to why we're doing this work. That's expected, but at the same time, how good efforts fail is when you do not have the support of the community and the understanding of the community as you continue to make those changes. So what I'm banking on is the allyship that we have here that's going to help us as we continue to move forward in this system. In education, one of the things we pride ourselves on is being lifelong learners. That means that we consistently grow. And one of the ways that we can consistently grow is by learning from the individuals that we teach. As an English teacher, some of my most fondest memories are being vulnerable in front of students and learning about their everyday interactions, how they learn, their cultures, and how that impacts the way that they learn. To do those very things, to have and develop those meaningful relationships with students so that when issues arise, we're able to address them differently. And as a result of that, we have these hierarchies that happen in school systems. And then we have the haves and the have-nots. More often than not, those haves and have-nots, when you disaggregate that by race, when it comes to privilege, when it comes to who's taking which classes, when it comes to who's excelling, when it comes to who's getting information and who's not, it's directly related to economic disparities and racial division and racial lines. And so simply what we're trying to do is name that and address that systemically. Mm-hmm. Although that work will take time, there are actions that we can continue to do now. Many of those actions, and some of those actions are the very things that we're starting with now, are having conversations like this with our community, where we start being able to comfortably grapple with race and have conversations about words that are normally upsetting to people, but do it in a way where we can continue to work through and lean into that discomfort so that we can come out on the other side and have better understandings and develop empathy. Having conversations about race is one of the most difficult things to do on the planet. I would argue that that is why we consistently have the racial disparities that we have in our country. The more that we begin to have these conversations, the better served we will be at addressing our issues systemically. And so some of the work for me, like I said, I'm happy to say is we need some catching up to do as a district, because again, we have a school community that's already moving forward. And as a result of that, it's really, really important for us to listen and understand and make sure that as we continue to do this work, we're as transparent as possible. And so what will begin to happen more often moving forward in our district is I will begin to start giving more updates to our Board of Education, and more importantly to our school community about our work. But a lot of times what I will be doing is not just reporting about the work that we're doing in the district. I'll also be talking about how aligned that work is with what's happening in the community. Again, that way we will begin to grow and move together. But as I start thinking about this, and the more I have this conversation and talk time and time again, we certainly as a district have some catching up to do, because clearly our community is a little further ahead than where our district is, and we need to catch up and find ways to do that. So I'm thankful that I have the individuals that are here tonight with me as we continue that journey.
Thank you so much. I want to go back just one moment to something you said about, these are hard conversations to have. And yeah. One of the things that I still sometimes hear from people is that, and it's white people, that mm-hmm. talking about race is in and of itself divisive. Mm-hmm. And how would you respond to someone who said that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would probably start by asking why, and finding out more about why that person has that feeling or belief. More often than not, what happens when two people communicate, especially if we're communicating about something that maybe is a touchy issue, is we have default mechanisms within ourselves that deflect and detour us from having truthful and meaningful conversations. And so I say that to say, more often than not, when someone has that sort of position, there has been an experience that they've had that has been quite negative that has taken place when they have had conversations about race. Maybe the intent versus the impact. Maybe they meant to say one thing during a conversation, it was taken out of context, and the end result was a feeling of hurt and that they felt less than, and as a result of that, they shut down. I'm just using that as an example, right? But what ultimately needs to happen is finding ways to develop the empathy and ways in which we're able to have this dialogue where I can understand that, okay, this person feels this way about race because these particular conditions or these particular symptoms, or this is something that they have experienced. Once you understand that experience, look, I can relate to that. I can relate to feeling bad or feeling less than or feeling that my communication was taken out of context. But then at that time, I can also hope to provide a different perspective on maybe how I look at and interpret race and how I have a perspective about that. I hope that in sharing that, just as I have listened and received someone else's perspective, maybe they'll learn a little bit from that. And maybe through them probing and asking me more questions, they find out more about my context. And then again, that way we're learning about one another. We're exploring each other's humanity. Then we're going to find something that we do agree with, and we're going to find some common ground. And then when we find that common ground, then perhaps we can go back to some of those more difficult and touchy issues and have further and deeper conversations as human beings about that in a way that's far more productive than a space of blaming and judgment.
Exactly. Everything is hard before it's easy, right?
Absolutely.
And I have to actually pass along, I am on a listserv with other librarians, and I shared your Own the Impact with someone who is just beginning some of these conversations in their library and in their community. Just found that really valuable. Like, yes, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings when I said X. Tell me why it hurt your feelings, and I will do my best to do better next time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Intent versus impact is critical. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Kyle.
Hi.
So we've talked about talking to yourself about race, learning what's going on, what's happening in the schools. How do you talk about it? What ideas does BStrong Together have for how to talk about it with your family, particularly with your children?
Well, first off, like everybody else, I am really so honored to be here to talk about this. Those of you who know me know that this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And so I've been working with Sam and Zina and Jessica and Grant and Nate and Brian Turcotte we meet every 3 weeks. We've been doing that for months to have these conversations with each other, and how the district and Courageous Conversations, the library, Be the Change, can come together, and BStrong can come together to, have these conversations and help the community in these learning opportunities. So it's so nice to be here. I think one of the things I wanted to start with, I've been giving this a lot of thought. So I am one of those incredibly fortunate people who has had the same best friends since before I can possibly remember. We have been best friends since we were 18 months old when our mothers introduced us. We were neighbors. And so my best friend Kathy has grown up as my sister, and her parents as my other parents who live 2 doors down and across the street. And I am probably quadruply and then some fortunate because my best friend and her family, my other parents, are Black. And I've been thinking a lot as we do this work about my own memories of being a child, and the fact that I knew that Kathy's skin was a different color than mine, but there was no there was no bias about that. There was nothing more than an observation. I had, freckles, and I have hazel eyes, and Kathy has brown eyes and brown hair. It was simply an observation. It was nothing more than that. And I've certainly told the story to our group about the moment when that became a reality for me, that somehow there were people who would judge Kathy in some kind of different way than they would look at me. And so this is something, I was 6 years old, and this is something that has been in my heart ever since that moment. And so I have talked about race and studied race and written papers on race and taken classes on race and made choices in my life to make sure that I was in environments that were diverse. I made choices in my life and in my family's life and my children's lives to put ourselves into places where we weren't surrounded by white people. I went off to college, and I started at school in a tiny little liberal arts college in upstate New York. In my memory, I don't believe there was a person of color in the entire school that I can remember. And toward the end of my freshman year, I called my mother and said, I can't do this anymore. I need to transfer schools. And so I called my mom and said, I want to transfer to Emory in Atlanta. And Mom, it's 70, is representation from 78 different countries and all these people who speak different languages, and they're so different, and that's where I want to go. And my mom, I remember my mom's first response was, I always thought that's where you should go, except you wouldn't look anywhere south of the Mason-Dixon line. And so it was off, your list. So I transferred to Emory, and I got my undergrad degree in psychology, specializing in child development and education, and came back home to go get my master's in education and social policy at Northwestern. And my choices, I chose to do my student teaching in Evanston because I wanted to be in a diverse school. I chose schools where I taught, where again, I had these very diverse classrooms, racially, culturally, ethnically, because that curiosity and that wanting to be around people who are different than I am and learn and celebrate and is such a part just of who I am. And part of that is because of my parents. It's because that's how the choices they made. They chose the street that we lived on, because on our street in the almost entirely white town of Glencoe, we had two African-American families. And that was a choice they made, that they chose that street because they wanted me to grow up there. So I think what we as parents do, the power that we have in the choices that we make and the words that we say and our actions are really important in terms of what we teach our kids. So with that being said, to answer Sam's question, I think one of the most important things to know, and I think is the fact that the research shows that babies notice racial differences by 6 months. And they begin to show signs of racial bias by the time they're the age of 4. So these are conversations we need to be having with our children early and often. There is not a time that is too soon to start incorporating, the media that you're showing your children, the books that are, around in their rooms, the toys that you purchase for them, the places you take them. Looking for a culturally rich environment and creating a culturally rich environment in your house and in your home, it kind of starts with that. And so I think BStrong Together has a campaign called the Time to Talk campaign. And the whole foundation underneath Time to Talk is that you have these important topics like mental health or drugs and alcohol or healthy relationships. And the whole idea is that it's not one 60-minute conversation, it's 61-minute conversations that make the difference. So it's not, I'm going to sit my child down on the couch and I'm going to talk to them about race for 60 minutes and then I can put the check in the box and I've done my job and now I'm finished. That it's the little conversations. It's when you see these learning opportunities that appear in your world and it comes naturally. It's not the sitting them down on the couch and saying, oh, today is Wednesday, so we're going to talk about race. It's, when you weave it, it becomes a part of who you are. It's as you weave it into your world and it feels natural for them. So I think that is another, sort of big lesson to take away. And I think in doing some work, obviously, with Courageous Conversations and our work as a collective group, I think we've talked some about the challenges of when we raise kids. It's important for kids to know that it's okay to notice racial differences. It is okay. I think that as white parents, we're really scared that our child is going to notice something and point it out. And so, it's okay that kids notice differences. It's okay. I was thinking about the fact that when we teach colors, I was a kindergarten teacher for a lot of my career. So when, we teach kids colors, we teach them that it's a blue car and it's a red bird and it's a, green pencil, but somehow teaching that it is, brown skin makes us anxious. And so the problem is that underlying that communicates to kids that there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. When we hush them, when we quiet them, when we skip over that detail, it communicates in a very subtle way that perhaps there's something wrong with that. And so it's simply an observation. Kids, especially when they're very young, these are just observations. And, I remember the first time one of my kids, saw somebody and pointed it out. And I said, yes. And look at my skin. I have, the pink skin and I have, kind of brown hair and they have black hair, and you just normalize it. It's an observation. So I think that's one piece of it. I also think that, we want to build kids' curiosity about things. So if we squash that doesn't tell them that it's okay to talk about it. It doesn't tell them that it's okay to bring it to your attention. Now, obviously, we need to teach them how to do that in a sensitive, respectful way. But by shutting it down, that is communicating the wrong message, I think, that we want to send to our kids. So I think it's important for us as parents to encourage our kids to ask questions, to encourage them to share observations and to be respectfully curious about things. I think it's important to talk about differences in positive ways, and that our skin color, regardless of whatever our skin color is, that doesn't make us better or worse people. There are wonderful, fabulous people of every color, and then there are not so wonderful and fabulous people of every color. That is not what defines who we are. Mm-hmm. So again, it's encouraging the curiosity, encourage learning. One of the other things to do is because again, I was a teacher, books are a fabulous way. Make sure you have books that talk about race. Make sure that you have books that show, heroes and heroines and characters of all different colors. Bring that into your life and into your home. And it's a good role model for the kids. And it also is a great way to spark conversation. One of the links I gave Sam for you is Common Sense Media has a great page that covers a whole bunch of different types of media, books, movies, podcasts, videos, all kinds of different things that all address race and racism, how to talk to your kids. So I gave that link to Sam. That's one of the links that I think I've given her 6, so that you'll have lots of resources if you're interested. So I think one of the other things I was thinking about too, Jess, while you were talking was, it's also really important that we as the adults recognize our bias, and we've got to work through that, because if we don't, then again, what is the message we're communicating to our kids? So we have to kind of double check ourselves with some regularity, where where's the bias peeking through, and what do I do with that? And I think the other piece too is that when that happens, depending on the age of your kids, you can model for them that process of, oh, I just realized in that moment, I had this bias is rising up. Okay, so what do I do about that? Well, maybe I should go and learn more, or maybe I should call a friend and talk this through some, but model for your kids what to do in those situations so that they learn, because bias is unfortunately just sort of a part of human nature. So it's what we do with that and how we work our way through it and learn and be curious. I think the other thing too that scares us sometimes is, as parents, we do not have to have all the answers. That is okay. It is okay to not know. It is okay to say, I think I have to think about that a little bit. I might need to talk to my friend about that, or, your mom or your dad about that. I have to think, my kids are very used to, I think I have to process that a little bit. And then can we come back to it? And it's okay to do that. We're not perfect. And it's okay to say, I need a minute, or I need a few minutes, or I need a day. The important thing is you have to come back to it. That can't be the excuse to just push it off and then not come back. It's okay to say, I need a minute or some time because I have to think it through, but you have to come back. That can't be your excuse to just push it off. And I think the other two big pieces, and I promise I'll be fast because I know we're getting late, is really that it's important as our kids get older to understand what systemic racism. I think that's been one of the largest shifts, at least from my childhood and growing up to now, is the idea that just teaching kids to be colorblind is not the right answer, because it doesn't acknowledge the systems that are at work. It doesn't acknowledge the struggle that is there for people of color in this country. So it's important that as kids get older, that you're talking about the systems, you're talking about systemic racism, you're talking about how do you be an ally? How do you stand up? What can you do? What can we as a family do? And those conversations can be taking place when they're younger to some degree. Again, it all needs to be age appropriate. But again, it's, how do I make things better, and how do I help? How do I learn more? How do I just try to make the world a better place? So that's my spiel.
Thank you very much. I will also, and this was a resource from both Kyle and Jess that I threw in the chat, the Raising White Kids by Dr. Jennifer Harvey. Actually, Be the Change Barrington and the library did a program together based around this book discussion. And I will say it is one of those that you may occasionally find yourself talking back to, going, I don't do that. I didn't do what? And again, the people on this call have heard me say this before, but I buy the parenting books for the library, and every new parenting book that comes in, I'm like, dang it, I did it wrong. My children are in their 20s. I did it wrong. Come back. We need a do-over. I've learned something new. So I really tried hard to get out of the Raising White Kids discussion and like have one of the youth librarian can do that. But that person doesn't have any children. So they're like, no, I think you need to be there too. I learned so much about myself and about my own relationship and processing of race, racial justice, that sort of a thing from that book. And a little bit more of an understanding sometimes of the people who go to, what I was asking Nate about earlier, that little kids, 4-year-olds are very invested in the world being fair. And as they start to see injustice happening, there's a couple ways that they can go with that. And one is to start looking for ways to help make the world a better place. The other is to deny that the world is actually unfair and to say, well, it must be something about those people that makes the world harder for them than it is for me. So just there's a lot of insights, a lot of learning and growing. And again, emphasizes that lifelong learning. You're not done. There will always be place to go. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and do better, but always more to learn. So thank you very much, Ms. Zina, Dr. Zina. My apologies.
Okay.
If you would share some of your learning, some of your knowledge with us.
It's lovely to be at the end of this panel because so much of what is on a scribbled piece of paper has just been crossed out. Let me suggest something. There's a quote by a former president of the Ford Foundation, one of our largest granting agencies. His name is Franklin Thomas. And the quote is, "One day, our descendants will think it incredible that we spent so much time, that we spent so much attention talking about things like the amount of melanin in our skin or the shape of our eyes, instead of the unique identifying traits that make us a complex us." There's going to come this day. So when I think of Black history, I want to think about what's the point between now and then, and how do we make that history come alive now? So there's going to be this day when this conversation is going to have much less play. How do we get there? Much of what my colleagues and my friends, and I'm grateful to be able to call them both, have said is part of our space between here and between now and then. And I think of it in 3 different rounds. That Jess's introduction for us was perfect, because the first round is one of being curious as an individual. And I would tell anybody who wants to do the work of getting from where we are to that day that Thomas talked about, anybody who wants to do the work of being an anti-racist, of moving our world forward, has to first be curious about what they see. So at any moment of the day, you can ask who's present and who's absent. You can ask who has power and who doesn't have power. You can ask whose voice is heard, whose voice is silenced. I don't care if you're on Metro, in your corporate suite, or at your dining room table. Who's present, who's powerful, who's calling the shots, who's not. And just be curious about that. It was a moment in 2007 when the Community Church of Barrington hired an African-American woman. And a congregant said, "We didn't hire you because you were Black, we hired you in spite of it." And there were people who heard that. And what he meant by that was, we didn't see your color. And so then we could have this conversation about why that was important. So you just have to be awake to notice. That's first. That's that personal level that Jess has already talked about. Being curious about what's around you and writing down your questions, the things that rise up. A gentleman was filming me for Good Shepherd Hospital the other day, and he said, "Why do Black people keep killing each other?" And he felt comfortable to ask that question. So sitting in my sanctuary, we had a whole conversation about why that might happen on the south and west sides of Chicago. He was curious. He thought to ask the question. And I said to him, that's the beginning. So at the personal level, what makes you go, What makes you wonder about whatever it is? That's one level. The second level is the communal level. And Kyle has just illustrated that beautifully. When she talks about the programming that BStrong Together puts forward, when she talks about the work of, and Jess talks about the work, and Sam talks about the work of courageous conversations. There's a program, for instance, Sam's church at St. Michael's, where once a month, the third Wednesday, we get together and 50 people, and we talk about a book or a movie that focuses on the issues of race. Wednesday, the book is called Biased. We start out with a general discussion, and then we go into small groups and we have this conversation on a communal level. We have the opportunity to ask each other questions. We have the opportunity, again, to be curious. We have the opportunity to learn. Don't have to be experts, don't have to know it all, have to come and be open. Those questions about which you're curious, how do you carry them to a larger venue where you're not in your own echo chamber, where you have the chance to kind of think through together what these topics are? And let me tell you a reason the communal piece is also important. It's easy in this time to pick up the phone and call your Black friend, or call your Latinx friend, or call your LGBTQ friend, or take your pick, and hear that single dialogue. But I don't represent all the Black people in the United States. And so when you talk to me, you get Zina's point of view. But when we do this in community, it's broader. So, and it doesn't put the work on the other. When you pick up the phone and call that person, it's asking them to teach you, as opposed to you bringing your curiosity into the setting where we can learn together. That communal piece is precious. And Barrington, of all the places in the world, is doing really well by it, whether it's Courageous Conversations, whether it's the anti-racism work that's being done at St. Michael's, whether it's the work that Kyle is doing, whether it's the work that the Samaritan Counseling Center is doing, whether it's the kinds of presentations and programs that Be the Change is putting on. You have, or the library and the many opportunities. We have a community that is diving into this. And a couple of us are after the White House to shift their programming too, because that's another venue when we can come together and have these conversations. Third level. And Ibram X. Kendi, the gentleman who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist and Stamped and many other things, has a quote. I didn't give this to Sam, but Kendi says that changing hearts and minds is not enough. So this personal level and the communal level is important, but not enough. Kendi goes on to say, our focus should be on changing policy, but change in public policy generally requires majority support. And that suggests the need for empathetic understanding of the issues. Do you hear the connection? That it's the personal level, it's the communal level where we dialogue, and it's the change at the policy level. But that empathetic understanding doesn't happen at the policy level. It happens at that personal and communal level. So we build through these cycles in order to get from today to this day when we won't notice with the kind of clarity, the divisions among us. And I think the last thing that I want to say is, and my colleagues have said it, it really is curiosity that fuels this. As long as I can sit in a meeting and be the only person of color and not notice it, something's wrong. Cannot call names, but recently the diversity and equity team that Nate has put together, we had a meeting and we divided into groups. And there were 4 people in the group I happened to be assigned to, and there was one white person. I happen to know this person. So I mentioned to them, I said, what's it like to be the only white person? This person's response was, I didn't notice. And so we had this conversation about the privilege of not having to notice. And I want to alleviate that privilege from everybody who's listening. I want to call you to a kind of consciousness that is the source of your curiosity. And so when you take your kid to a party, who's there, who's not? When you go skating, who's there, who's not? When you're sitting in a coffee shop, as we pay attention to these things, we find moments to jot down our questions, to be curious. And by virtue of being in Barrington, we have the communal spaces we can go. Last thing I'll say. At the institutional level, Kendi's comment about policy changes happen at the institutional level. That's where Grant and Nate are dead on, changing an institution. But let me suggest that the world has no shortage of issues to attack. Mm-hmm. Find the one that speaks to your heart. It might be education. Connect to Grant and Nate. It might be immigration. If that's your issue, don't connect to Nate and Grant. Find the place where you can connect. If it's healthcare, given what we've learned through this COVID crisis, you can only sustain the energy for change if it touches your heart and soul. The climate, the mass incarceration, gun violence, take your pick. But move to that institutional level where you are willing to stay up at night thinking and praying. I'm done.
So we will give an opportunity for those of you who are in our audience. If you have questions that you would like to address to the panel, please put those in the chat while folks are taking a moment to get their thoughts together and put some things out. Something that Zina said, as always, spurred a memory for me. And I have to ask her to repeat this every time. Reticulating
activating system. Your reticular activating system. So if I say the word pink, you'll now see pink for the rest of the day.
Right.
Because we put these ideas in our brain, and then our brain is so smart, it starts to look.
Yes.
So you train your reticular activating system, you can look it up, to look for the absence of diversity.
Yes.
You see it.
Yeah, very much. If you start looking for a new car, you'll suddenly start seeing that model of car everywhere. If you learn a new word, you'll see that word everywhere. So one of the things that I do outside of the Barrington Library is I serve on the Illinois Library Association's Public Policy Committee. I'm most of the way through my second year of that service. And we've met by Zoom since. This is simultaneously the most and least hipster thing I've ever said. We've been meeting by Zoom since before Zoom was a thing. So I was looking at that little computer screen full of people and realized, and ILA is getting ready to put out a statement, as so many did after George Floyd's murder. And the 15 or 18 people who are on our call are all white people. Now we're a statewide organization. We're pulling from downstate. We're pulling from all over the place. But still. So I asked the person who was the chair of that committee at that time if it was okay for me to reach out to there is a diversity committee with ILA. Can I reach out to them and ask some of those people to join our committee? And he was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then a few other listers came up. So I've been putting little feelers out hey, it's going to come up and they're going to start looking in January or February. You're going to be appointed in April. Please, please, please think about joining this. So I started doing that unbeknownst to the incoming president of ILA, who is the person who kind of oversees all of the committees. And then in that serendipitous way of when you start looking for opportunities to make change, the universe will make it easier for you. I'm the chair of that committee next year. And public policy is the one that does. We do the legislative work. We talk to representatives and senators, both at the state level and the federal level. So I would just to reinforce that when you start looking for opportunities, you see what you look for.
Yep.
So I would encourage folks to keep that in mind. And we have not gotten a lot of questions that have come through for us yet. So I will give one last call. If folks have questions they would like to put to our panel, please put them in the chat. It will come directly to me and I will not necessarily identify you as the asker unless you tell me you want me to.
This just means we were very thorough.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or that it's late.
A number of
We're ready for dinner
in our midst, so not surprising. But is there anything for the folks who are on my panel? Is there anything you feel I will say one thing that occurred to me after we started putting this together. It occurred to me, I had gathered statistics for another program that I did on medical care which certainly been highlighted by the COVID crisis of how different health and wellness is for people of color in the United States. But I also knew that we had enough to say with just us. I did do a program in January of this year with Rafael Malpica, who is the Director of Community Relations at Advocate Good Shepherd, more specifically about COVID, but we did also touch on how much harder it's hit certain communities. And that is available on the library's YouTube channel if you're interested in seeing that and learning more about that. But there's a lot of data, a number of data points. Actually, way back in June, Zina and Cynthia Armendariz Maxwell and I did a program together. We spoke a little bit and incorporated a number of data points about the differences. Even when you correct for socioeconomic status and age of the parent, the outcomes for women of color giving birth are significantly worse in the 21st century in America, right? That's childbirth. Nobody should die in childbirth anymore, right? And yet it happens. So we do have one question from one of our audience members. Says specifically, when you look around and notice the absence of diverse people around you, what do you do?
One, noticing it is first, and then begin to ask why. You can, I'm a little bit of a data geek, so this might not work for everybody, but I've been a member of the Barrington community now 14 years. So I went back and did some history, just at the Historical Society of like where people came from in Barrington and how they came, and I found out, and the whole communities came to make this town what it is, and it is great in so many ways. But then once you get a sense of why, then my favorite question is what next? And what next is, am I in an organization that I can find a sister organization that we can exchange some experiences? Is my child in a scout troop, and can we find a scout troop somewhere else that might have a different set of experiences? Am I in a church community, and in my denomination, I could find out if there's a church that's different. So you start with something you have in common, right? So scout groups or church groups or gardening groups, and you come together as equals. And I say it that way because so often when communities like Barrington are trying to understand or connect with communities of difference, get on a bus and go like they're visiting, and I'm just going to say this, go like they're visiting the zoo. I mean, sort of like, how do they live and what's their habitat? And it's not equal. And so what are the ways to create equal footing? If you're in a book club, see if you can find a book club that is in a different community, and go see a play together. Read the book together. You find those connections so that there is that place of communication.
Thank you so much. I would, just because you've given me the segue to speak about this, when you talk about finding those connections, the League of Women Voters and I of the Palatine area we've done a number of programs together, and we're doing a program. The great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells has written a book, and Ida B. the Queen. So we have her coming to speak for a library program, and my League of Women Voters partner reached out to the local NAACP, and they are co-sponsoring this author's visit with us. So Michelle Duster. So the opportunities are there if you look for them, and they're very excited about that. So I'm gonna read this directly rather than trying to paraphrase a little bit. We have another question that came in. So in my introduction, they're saying that I mentioned something about fighting injustice and Zina's involvement with that. I did not hear that discussed specifically. Are there any local organizations that are addressing issues of injustices experienced by people of color in communities like ours, whether by police or other authoritative figures or businesses?
I don't know if somebody else has a response. I can talk about a little about the police. So we haven't gotten to the institutional level except with the school, and thank God with the school in Barrington. But we have had some instances with our police, less around people of color and more around people with special needs. So a different population. And through the Samaritan Counseling Center, there has been some special training. Our chief of police was very open to this. And so we've done some work with them around those kinds of injustices. There's a movement among leaders in our community to open themselves to training. And there are others on this panel who might be able to say more about that, but I have been astonished by the number of leaders in Barrington who have said, yes, I want to learn more. So we haven't quite moved to the institutional levels, except in these more one-on-one ways to offer training, to have it accepted, and to be working in that move. A lot of the work that I do personally around issues of injustice come through my church community and my denomination, which is the American Baptist Churches of Metro Chicago. We've done a fair amount of work around mass incarceration and immigration because of the makeup of our churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's true for several local churches. Again, I know St. Michael's has done a lot of work with a refugee organization.
We did that together.
Yes. Yep. I also, Grant, if you don't mind me calling on you, I know that's something that Be the Change has paid some attention to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've focused primarily in education, but as we've evolved, we want to tackle this notion of intersectionality. Again, I'm not just a Black person, I'm also a male, I'm also a Christian and heterosexual. But now you're tackling that whole big thing. And the way we've done it is similar to how we started with race. We've tackled it through data and just getting curious, getting proximate. And part of that is also understanding the relations between race, police, and then also through this expanding our reach to beyond Barrington. We partnered with and had discussions with other communities in the Chicagoland area to help us become more educated about this. Because again, the majority of us are alumni and our current students. So we need to, understand that yes, our knowledge bank is nowhere near as full as we need to be. Thank God it's not where it used to be, but we can also get better in that. So we've gone through that and, continue to learn and see, what lessons we can take from them and then apply that to Barrington. Right now, we're very much in the early stages. We're just discussing it because, we like to think of it as, if we want to solve a problem, right, let's not complain, but really think about it and then offer a potential solution to it. It's one thing to just bring noise, it's another thing to bring noise and a solution. That's kind of our goal. And again, we're nowhere near at the stage where we want to come forward with that publicly right now, but I can tell you those things are in the works. I can guarantee that.
Cooking. Yeah, and I think some of it, there are so many ways to engage with that. Again, in response to text messages from my children, my husband and I increased the money that we donated to various organizations, ACLU and a few others, things of that sort. So there are opportunities. I don't know if there is, especially in, quarantine times, as many opportunities to go out and directly, join protests, join rallies, things of that sort. Education is I think educating oneself, the internal education, I think is really key right now. And not that they are two separate things, not that you have to get to 100% before you can start I'm sorry, I have a brace on, I can't quite bring my other arm up that high, but before you can start doing external work, you can do both of those things at the same time. Yeah, it's different. So I had a couple people who needed to log off, but are extending their thanks. And I certainly very much from my heart, thank you so, so much. And I will BCC to everyone who is here, all of the various links that we have put out. And for the person who praised that question and who just gave me the other one, please go ahead and send me an email back, and I will make you aware of the things that I know about, or put you in touch with the people who might be interested in helping you to make something more like that happen. So, so thank you all so, so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. And we appreciate your time and attention. We have thanks from the group. So thank you all very much.
Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Together.
Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.
Bye.